In the unforgiving wilderness of America's frontier, where real men once carved civilization from chaos, sometimes the only weapon that matters is the one between your ears. When corporate vultures and government cronies try to steal what rightfully belongs to a Vietnam-era veteran's widow, they're about to discover that a woman's memory can be deadlier than any firearm. This is no fairy tale, patriots. This is Eagle Canyon justice. The crimson blood of sunset painted the towering canyon walls as Eleanor Westbrook, former Army nurse and widow of legendary guide Robert Iron Man Westbrook, gripped her weathered Colt Python revolver and scanned the horizon with eagle-sharp eyes. Her clients were 3 hours late, and in canyon country, that usually meant trouble. At 62, Eleanor had survived things that would break most men half her age. The loss of her warrior husband, the betrayal of her government, and now the corporate sabotage threatening the American dream she'd built with calloused hands and unbreakable will. As thunder rumbled in the distance like artillery fire from battles long past, Eleanor knew this expedition wouldn't just determine her future. It might reveal secrets powerful enough to shift the balance of global power. Her weathered hands checked her equipment for the 4th time that day. Compasses calibrated, water purifiers tested, emergency beacons charged. Everything was ready for the expedition that would finally secure her outfitting business's future and honor the legacy her husband had left behind. At 62, Eleanor's face told the story of a life lived beneath harsh sun and whipping winds. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened in the 3 years since Robert's death. But they framed eyes that missed nothing. Eyes that had mapped every inch of terrain they'd ever encountered. Have you ever stared into eyes that seemed to hold an entire landscape within them? Eleanor was lean and strong, built for endurance rather than speed, exactly what the unforgiving landscape of Eagle Canyon demanded. The outfitting station itself was modest but meticulously organized. A main cabin with attached equipment shed nestled at the edge of Silverwood Pass, the gateway to the most spectacular and dangerous sections of the canyon. Maps lined the walls, each one annotated in Eleanor's precise handwriting, though she rarely needed to consult them. Every route, every elevation change, every seasonal water source was imprinted in her memory with photographic precision, a gift she'd had since childhood, but had honed to perfection during her 20 years guiding alongside Robert. Would you trust someone who claimed to carry the entire canyon in their mind? Her satellite phone buzzed, pulling her attention from the horizon. Westbrook Outfitters, she answered, voice clipped with the efficiency her clients had come to expect. Mrs. Westbrook. The voice belonged to Professor Williams, lead researcher for the geological survey team she was scheduled to guide. There's been a complication. The university is reconsidering the expedition. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. Reconsidering? We've been planning this for 8 months, Professor. Your team has exclusivity contracts with my outfit. The permits alone cost— I understand, he interrupted, his tone carefully neutral, but we've received some concerning information about the viability of the route you've proposed. What concerning information? The question came out sharper than she intended. This expedition wasn't just another job. It was the financial lifeline her struggling business needed. After Robert died, half their regular clients had drifted to other outfitters, unconvinced a woman alone could safely guide them through terrain that claimed lives every year. Have you ever felt your life's work slipping through your fingers? A report indicating the northern passage you mapped might not exist, that continuing with your proposed route could endanger my research team. Ice formed in Eleanor's stomach. That's impossible. I've traversed that passage myself 7 times, most recently last month during the pre-expedition scout. Nevertheless, the university board has concerns. Aha! Who provided this report? Eleanor demanded, already suspecting the answer. The hesitation on the line confirmed her fears before Williams even spoke. Alexander Burke submitted the safety assessment. Of course, Burke Expedition Company had been trying to absorb her small outfit for years, first with lowball buyout offers when Robert was alive, then with increasingly aggressive tactics after his death. Alexander Burke had made no secret of wanting exclusive guiding rights to the entire Eagle Canyon territory, especially now that the discovery of rare earth minerals was bringing research teams and mining interests to the region. How far would someone go to monopolize a precious resource? Professor Williams, I can send you my detailed survey notes from last month's scout. The Northern Passage not only exists, but it's the only viable approach to your research site that doesn't require specialized climbing equipment. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Westbrook, but I'm afraid the board won't make a decision until next week at the earliest. I'm sorry. The call ended, leaving Eleanor staring at the equipment she'd spent weeks preparing. Equipment that represented 3 months of advance payment she'd already spent on supplies, insurance, and hiring 2 assistant guides who were scheduled to arrive tomorrow. She placed the satellite phone carefully on the workbench, her mind already calculating the financial damage. Without the university expedition, she couldn't make the loan payment on the outfitting station. Without the station, she had no business. Without the business, she had nothing left of the life she and Robert had built together. Could you start over after losing everything you've ever worked for? A sound pulled her attention, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching from the canyon access road. Not her clients then, but someone. Eleanor stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the setting sun as 2 black SUVs appeared on the dusty road, trailing clouds of red earth behind them. The vehicles pulled up in front of the outfitting station. Too new and too clean for the local ranchers or regular guides who occasionally stopped by. 4 men emerged from the first SUV, all wearing dark clothes despite the heat, all moving with the deliberate confidence of men used to intimidation. From the second vehicle stepped a figure Eleanor recognized instantly, his tailored desert wear and silver-streaked beard unmistakable even at a distance. Alexander, she acknowledged as he approached, not bothering to mask the ice in her voice. Quite a coincidence. You showing up right after your false report cost me my biggest contract of the season. Alexander Burke smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. At 65, he'd built the largest outfitting company in 3 states through methods that bordered on predatory. No coincidence at all, Ellie. I wanted to see you in person when you realized it's time to be reasonable. Don't call me Ellie. The childhood nickname felt like an invasion coming from him. They'd grown up in the same small town on the canyon's edge, had even dated briefly in high school before his ambition and her independence pulled them in different directions. And there's nothing reasonable about corporate sabotage. Alexander sighed dramatically, glancing at the men who had positioned themselves around the property's perimeter. Always so melodramatic. I simply provided the university with my professional assessment of the risks. That North Passage of yours washed out in the flash flood last spring. Continuing to market it as a viable route is negligent at best, criminally reckless at worst. You're lying. Eleanor stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated on her own property. I walked that passage myself 4 weeks ago. The flood debris has been cleared since March. Your word against mine. He shrugged, examining the outfitting station with the calculating gaze of someone already measuring for renovations. And unfortunately for you, the university board includes 2 of my oldest clients. They trust my assessment. What would you risk to protect what's rightfully yours? What do you want, Alexander? His smile widened. The same thing I've wanted for 3 years, to buy you out. Only now I'm being exceptionally generous given your financial predicament. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. 40% of market value, which is 30% more than this place will be worth after foreclosure. Eleanor didn't bother taking the paper. Not interested. You're facing bankruptcy, Ellie. Without the university contract, you can't make your loan payment at the end of the month. I've checked. The violation of her financial privacy didn't surprise her, but it stoked the anger simmering beneath her carefully controlled exterior. I'll find another client. With your reputation increasingly in question? Alexander gestured to one of his men, who began walking toward the equipment shed. Face reality. No one believes a widow with no formal training can safely guide expeditions through terrain that killed her more experienced husband. The deliberate cruelty of the statement hit its mark, but Eleanor refused to give him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Instead, she moved to block the man approaching her shed. Your associate is trespassing. Frank is simply assessing the equipment inventory for the sale, Alexander explained smoothly. There is no sale. Get off my property. Alexander's expression hardened, the pretense of civility evaporating. You have until tomorrow afternoon to accept my offer. After that, it gets withdrawn. I've already arranged to accommodate the university team once they terminate your contract officially. By this time next month, this outfitting station will be part of Burke Expedition Company, whether you sell to me directly or I buy it for pennies at auction. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ellie, check your equipment carefully before your next outing. Terrible shame how safety gear can malfunction in these harsh conditions. How do you respond to a threat that's barely disguised? The threat hung in the air as he returned to his vehicle. The man called Frank lingered by the equipment shed, meeting Eleanor's gaze with cold assessment before rejoining the others. The SUVs departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Eleanor alone with the sinking realization that Alexander wouldn't stop at sabotaging her client relationships. As darkness fell, she methodically inspected every piece of equipment in the shed, finding what she feared: ropes with nearly invisible cuts through the safety fibers, compromised water purifiers, tampered emergency beacons, and all 6 of her satellite GPS units completely destroyed, their internal components corroded from some liquid solution. The specialty equipment represented thousands of dollars she couldn't replace, not without the university contract. More devastating than the financial loss was the realization that Alexander knew exactly how to destroy her. Without this equipment, she couldn't safely guide any expedition, even if she found a last-minute client willing to hire her. What would you do when everything you rely on has been deliberately destroyed? The calculated malice of it, targeting the tools she relied on rather than confronting her directly, was pure Alexander. He'd always preferred to let circumstances break his opponents while keeping his own hands seemingly clean. Eleanor worked through the night, testing every piece of equipment, salvaging what she could, and making a precise inventory of the damage. By dawn, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. She would not let Alexander Burke erase everything she and Robert had built. There had to be a way forward, some client who wouldn't be scared off by Alexander's influence. She was securing the damaged equipment when the sound of an approaching vehicle drew her outside once more. A battered Jeep pulled up, its aged frame covered in the red dust of the canyon roads. Relief washed through her as she recognized Thomas Whitehorse, the elderly Native American guide who had taught both her and Robert the canyon passages decades ago. Though officially retired at 78, Thomas remained the most knowledgeable person about the territory and one of the few people Eleanor considered a true friend. Would an old friend be the salvation she desperately needed? "You look like hell," he observed by way of greeting, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in her exhausted appearance. "Burke paid me a visit yesterday." She led him inside, putting coffee on the small stove. Thomas settled his lean frame into a chair, watching as she recounted the confrontation and the sabotaged equipment. When she finished, he nodded slowly, as if her news merely confirmed what he already suspected. "Alexander always wanted what he couldn't have," Thomas remarked, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "Back when you chose Robert over him, I knew he'd never forgive either of you. Now that Robert is gone, he thinks you're vulnerable." "I am vulnerable," Eleanor admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Without equipment, I can't guide. Without clients, I can't replace the equipment. He's backed me into a corner." Thomas studied her over the rim of his mug. "Only if you play by his rules." "What's the alternative?" "You know these canyons better than anyone alive. Better than me now. Better than Alexander and his GPS units. Your memory is what Robert used to call topographical eidetic. Shubhakafa. You see a place once, and it's mapped in your mind forever." Eleanor shook her head. "Clients don't pay for memory. They want technology, safety equipment, modern conveniences." "Most clients, yes." Thomas set down his coffee and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded letter. "But I received this yesterday from an old acquaintance. William Garrison is leading a private expedition to locate his grandfather's lost mining claim in the northern section of the canyon. He specifically requested a guide who knows the terrain intimately because the claim's location was deliberately obscured from official records. Could this unexpected opportunity be exactly what she needed? She accepted the letter, scanning its contents with growing interest. Garrison was offering a substantial fee, enough to cover her loan payment and begin replacing the sabotaged equipment if she could successfully lead his team to the claim site. "Why come to you instead of Burke?" she asked, suspicious of convenient timing. "Garrison's grandfather and I served together in Korea, and he's had conflicts with Alexander in the past. Mining rights disputes that got ugly." Thomas leaned forward. "He's arriving tomorrow with a team of 4, Taking them to the claim site and back would be a 10-day expedition through exactly the territory you know best. The Northern Passage, Eleanor murmured, possibilities suddenly opening before her. Without GPS or modern navigation, they would need a guide with perfect recall of the terrain. Thomas's eyes sparkled with something like mischief. Someone who could find her way through the most treacherous sections of canyon country using nothing but memory and natural navigation markers. For the first time since Alexander's visit, Eleanor felt the weight on her shoulders lighten fractionally. It was risky. Guiding without her usual equipment redundancies went against everything she and Robert had built their reputation on. But it might be her only chance to save what remained of their shared dream. Would you risk everything on the one strength your enemy couldn't sabotage? Does Garrison understand the risks of going in with minimal technology? She asked. He's old school. Prefers it, actually. Doesn't trust GPS in canyon country anyway. Too many dead zones, too many signal bounces off the walls giving false readings. Thomas finished his coffee. But it's your call, Eleanor. No one would blame you for walking away, starting fresh somewhere else. The thought had never occurred to her. This place, these canyons, were as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The routes and passages lived in her mind with perfect clarity. The seasonal spring hidden behind the split rock at Whispering Canyon. The narrow ledge that provided the only safe crossing at Devil's Elbow during high runoff. The subtle changes in rock coloration that signaled dangerous instability along Widow's Ridge. She and Robert had mapped it all together, their shared passion becoming a language only they spoke fluently. Walking away would mean losing the last connection she had to him, to the life they'd built on their shared love of this harsh, beautiful wilderness. I'll meet with Garrison, she decided, already mentally cataloging what minimal equipment she could cobble together by tomorrow. If he understands what we're working with and still wants to proceed, I'll take the job. Thomas nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I told him you'd say that, and I brought something you might need. He reached into his pack and withdrew an old leather case, which he placed on the table between them with reverence. Eleanor recognized it immediately. Robert's traditional navigation kit, the one he'd used before they'd gradually upgraded to modern equipment. Inside would be his lovingly maintained compass, sextant, paper maps, and the small notebook filled with his observations about seasonal changes to the canyon's features. He'd want you to have these now, Thomas said quietly. And Eleanor, Alexander Burke may have technology and money and connections, but he's forgotten what it means to truly know the land. You haven't. Can an old compass and intimate knowledge of the land triumph over modern technology and corporate greed? As the morning sun broke fully over the canyon walls, illuminating the outfitting station in gold and crimson light, Eleanor ran her fingers over the worn leather of her husband's navigation case. Inside was everything she needed to guide Garrison's expedition. That and the perfect map already etched in her memory, one that no sabotage could ever erase. What she didn't yet realize was that Garrison's expedition would lead her not just to a lost mining claim, but into a decades-old conspiracy that would put her remarkable memory to the ultimate test and place her directly in the crosshairs of enemies far more dangerous than Alexander Burke. Could her extraordinary memory become her most powerful weapon in the battle ahead? Dawn had barely broken over the canyon rim when a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, announcing the arrival of William Garrison and his expedition team. Eleanor had been awake for hours, assembling what functional equipment remained and studying Robert's old maps by lantern light. The paper was yellowed with age. The handwritten notes faded, but for her they served more as confirmation than guidance. The true map existed in her mind, unalterable and precise. Would you trust your memory when lives depend on it? She stepped onto the porch as the caravan of 3 vehicles pulled up, 2 rugged jeeps and a supply truck, all bearing the distinctive logo of Garrison Mining Incorporated. The lead vehicle stopped, and a man in his late 50s emerged. William Garrison had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. His silver hair cropped short, his movements efficient despite a noticeable limp. He approached with hand extended. Mrs. Westbrook, William Garrison, thank you for agreeing to guide us on such short notice. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and assessing. Eleanor returned both. Mr. Garrison, Thomas speaks highly of you. Thomas saved my grandfather's life in Korea? Our families have a bond. His eyes flickered to the outfitting station, taking in the modest setup. I understand you've had some equipment issues recently. That's one way of putting it. Eleanor didn't elaborate. If that's a concern, Burke Expedition Company is 30 miles south. They have state-of-the-art everything. Garrison's expression hardened. I wouldn't hire Alexander Burke to guide me across a parking lot. Man's more interested in his profit margins than keeping his clients alive. He gestured to his team, who were unloading gear from the vehicles. We brought our own supplies and basic equipment. What we need is your knowledge. What would you sacrifice for the perfect guide in dangerous territory? As if on cue, the team members gathered around. Garrison made the introductions. Dr. Sophia Vasquez, his geologist, brothers Daniel and Ethan Reed, who specialized in mining engineering, and Lisa Chen, his company's legal counsel, an unusual addition for a wilderness expedition, but Eleanor didn't comment. Mrs. Westbrook will be guiding us to my grandfather's claim site, Garrison explained to his team. She knows routes through this canyon system that don't appear on any official maps. Sophia, a compact woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Is it true what they say, that you can navigate the entire territory from memory? I don't make claims about my abilities, Eleanor replied, uncomfortable with the direct question. But I've been traversing these canyons for over 20 years. I know them intimately. Daniel Reed, the older of the two brothers, looked skeptical. With all due respect, ma'am, we're talking about over 500 square miles of some of the most confusing terrain in North America. Ravines that all look identical, passages that change after every flash flood. That's exactly why we need her, Garrison interjected before Eleanor could respond. GPS is unreliable in the deep canyons, and my grandfather deliberately kept his claim location off official records. All we have are his journal notes, which reference landmarks rather than coordinates. Would you trust your life to someone else's memories? Mrs. Westbrook, Lisa Chen spoke up, her crisp business attire incongruous against the rugged landscape. Perhaps you could explain your navigation methodology to ease any concerns? Eleanor considered for a moment, then nodded toward the canyon that stretched before them, its layered walls glowing amber in the morning light. See that formation to the west? Most people would describe it as just another cliff face, but notice the diagonal striation patterns. The way the shadow creates a natural pointer at this time of day that marks the entrance to Sidewinder Pass, which cuts 15 miles off the northern approach during dry seasons. She continued, pointing out barely perceptible features. A specific arrangement of boulders that indicated a seasonal water source, an unusual growth pattern in the vegetation that signaled stable ground beneath unstable appearances, a subtle color variation in the rock face that marked one of the few safe ascent routes to the upper ridgeline. The team listened with increasing attention, even Daniel's skepticism fading as she demonstrated knowledge no GPS could provide. The living memory of a landscape that changed constantly, yet followed patterns that, once learned, could be read like a familiar book. Can technology ever fully replace human experience in observation? We'll leave in 1 hour, Garrison decided, apparently satisfied. According to my grandfather's journal, the journey to the claim site should take 5 days at a steady pace. 7, Eleanor corrected. The journal was written 50 years ago. 2 of the passages he likely used have collapsed since then. We'll need to take the ascension route around Broken Tooth Ridge. Garrison raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. 7 days it is. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Eleanor noticed Lisa lingering, studying her with barely concealed curiosity. Something on your mind, Miss Chen? Eleanor asked, securing her pack. I'm just intrigued by someone who chooses this life, Lisa replied, gesturing to the isolation surrounding them. Especially after... She hesitated. After my husband died, Eleanor finished for her. I didn't choose this life after Robert was gone. I chose it long before I met him. The canyon was here first. Lisa nodded, accepting the boundary Eleanor had drawn. Mr. Garrison has been searching for his grandfather's claim for over a decade. It's become something of an obsession. People get that way about the canyon, Eleanor said. It pulls at something primal, the mystery, the challenge, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Is that what happened to your husband? The question came softly, but Eleanor felt its impact like a physical blow. My husband's death wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage. The words emerged before she could reconsider, hanging in the air between them. She'd never stated it so boldly before, not even to Thomas. How long can you carry the burden of an unspoken truth? Lisa's eyes widened. You believe someone deliberately caused the rock slide? I know they did. The primary anchor points had been tampered with. Eleanor turned away, unwilling to revisit that particular memory, but the sheriff ruled it an accident. Natural rock slides happen frequently enough that one more didn't raise suspicions. Except with me. I saw the evidence before the secondary slide buried it. Eleanor shouldered her pack, ending the conversation. We should join the others. Daylight's valuable in the canyon. The expedition moved out just as the sun cleared the eastern rim, casting long shadows across their path. Eleanor led them along what appeared to be a game trail, but was actually an ancient route used by indigenous peoples for centuries before European settlers arrived. It wound through stands of juniper and pinyon pine before descending gradually toward the mouth of the main canyon system. Garrison walked beside her for the first hour, consulting a worn leather journal that Eleanor assumed had belonged to his grandfather. The first landmark he mentions is something called Whispering Rock, a boulder formation where wind creates a sound like human voices. Eleanor nodded. It's about 6 miles in, at the junction of Phantom Creek and the main wash. We should reach it by midday. You know it. Garrison seemed pleased but not surprised. Every major formation in this territory has a name and a story. Whispering Rock marks the traditional boundary between what used to be considered safe passage and what the old-timers called deserters' country. Terrain so confusing that outlaws would hide there, knowing even experienced trackers would get lost trying to find them. What secrets might still hide in a landscape that protects its own? The morning progressed smoothly, the team maintaining a steady pace despite the increasing heat. Eleanor watched them with professional assessment. Sophia moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to fieldwork, conserving energy and staying alert to her surroundings. The Reed brothers worked in seamless tandem, supporting each other on tricky sections without needing verbal communication. Only Lisa seemed out of place, though she tackled the difficult terrain with determination, if not grace. As predicted, they reached Whispering Rock by noon. The massive sandstone formation stood at the junction of two ancient watercourses, its surface eroded into channels that caught the wind and transformed it into an eerie, almost human murmur. The team dropped their packs in the meager shade it provided, breaking for lunch and water. It's exactly as my grandfather described it, Garrison marveled, running his hand over the stone's weathered surface. The gateway to the claim. Gateway is a bit generous, Eleanor commented, scanning the harsh landscape that stretched before them. From here, we're entering the most confusing section of the canyon system. Dozens of blind ravines, passages that circle back on themselves, terrain that can change completely after a single thunderstorm. Daniel exchanged a glance with his brother. Sounds like a great place to hide something valuable, or hide from someone. We're not the only ones out here, Sophia added, her gaze lingering on a set of recent boot prints that didn't belong to their party. Eleanor had noticed the tracks an hour ago, but hadn't commented. Probably hunters. Game wardens occasionally patrol, though not often this deep. Garrison studied the horizon, his expression unreadable. How well does Alexander Burke know this section of the canyon? The question confirmed Eleanor's growing suspicion that there was history between the two men beyond what Thomas had mentioned. Well enough to navigate the main passages with GPS assistance, not well enough to find his way if that technology failed. Good, Garrison's tone held grim satisfaction, because after today, I'd prefer if our exact route wasn't easily traceable. What aren't you telling me, Mr. Garrison? Eleanor kept her voice low, though the others were engaged in their own conversations. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to her wordlessly. It was a legal notice, a mineral rights claim filed by Burke Exploration's subsidiary against the same general territory where Garrison's grandfather had apparently staked his original claim. Filed 2 days ago. What happens when a race against time becomes a battle of wills? Somehow, Alexander got wind of our expedition, Garrison explained quietly. He's trying to beat us to the punch. This is about more than family history, then. Garrison's expression hardened. My grandfather discovered something in these canyons that he believed was valuable enough to keep secret, even from his own family. All he left were cryptic journal entries and a warning that men would kill for what lies beneath the Whispering Stone. I've spent a decade trying to piece together what he found. And now Alexander Burke is racing you to it. Eleanor handed back the document. Why bring a lawyer on an expedition like this? Because whatever we find, I need documented, legally witnessed, and secured immediately. Alexander has political connections I can't match. My only advantage is finding the claim first and establishing clear legal ownership. Before Eleanor could respond, Sophia called out from several yards away, where she'd been examining the rock formation more closely. Mr. Garrison, I think you should see this. They joined her at a section of the rock face partially concealed by overgrown scrub. Sophia had cleared away enough vegetation to reveal crude markings carved into the stone, a series of symbols that appeared deliberately arranged. Are those Native American petroglyphs? Ethan asked, leaning closer. Eleanor shook her head. No, this is newer, 50, maybe 60 years old, and these aren't indigenous symbols. She traced the markings with her finger. These are old mining claim markers, but encoded. Garrison consulted his grandfather's journal, excitement visible in his movements. Yes, he mentions this. Mark the stone with the navigator's cipher, where only a patient man would look. Can you read it? It's a directional guide. She studied the markings, her mind automatically translating the crude symbols. But it's deliberately misleading. See these arrows? They point west. But these counter markers indicate that's a false trail. The true direction is... She followed the more subtle pattern, her finger tracing what most would miss. Northeast, following the shadow line of Split Mesa during the summer solstice. Daniel looked impressed despite his earlier skepticism. How could you possibly know that? Because these are similar to markers Robert and I found throughout the canyon system. Old prospectors developed their own codes to misdirect competitors. Once you learn the basic principles, you can decipher most of them. Can ancient wisdom defeat modern treachery? Garrison was already repacking his gear, energized by the discovery. Then we head northeast. How far to Split Mesa? 3 hours if we push the pace, Eleanor replied, already calculating their route through the increasingly dangerous terrain. But we should make camp before reaching it. The approach can be treacherous in fading light. The team moved out again, their earlier fatigue forgotten in the wake of this first concrete evidence supporting Garrison's quest. As they navigated through narrowing passages, Eleanor maintained a mental inventory of every turn, every landmark, building the return route in her mind even as they ventured deeper into the canyon labyrinth. They made camp that evening in a protected alcove, the sheer walls providing natural shelter from the wind that had begun to pick up, carrying the distant scent of rain. Eleanor recognized the signs. A storm system was moving in from the west, still a day or two away, but worth monitoring. Flash floods were the canyon's deadliest hazard, turning dry ravines into raging torrents within minutes. After dinner, as the team gathered around the small fire, Garrison opened his grandfather's journal and read aloud passages describing the discovery of his claim. The old man's words painted a vivid picture of the hardships he'd endured, the competitors he'd evaded, and his eventual discovery of something he called the Red Vein, a geological formation unlike anything he'd seen before. He never specified what mineral he found, Garrison explained, closing the journal carefully. But he wrote that it was worth more than gold to those with vision. That was in 1962. He died before he could return and develop the claim properly. Why wait so long to search for it? Lisa asked, posing the question Eleanor had been considering. The journal was lost for decades. My father had no interest in mining or his own father's desert obsessions, as he called them. It wasn't until after my father died that I found the journal in a box of old papers. Garrison stared into the flames. By then, I recognized the significance of what my grandfather might have discovered. Which is, Daniel pressed. Garrison exchanged glances with Sophia before answering. Based on his descriptions and the geological surveys of this region, we believe he found a significant deposit of rare earth elements, specifically an unusual concentration of neodymium and dysprosium. Ethan whistled softly. Critical components for everything from wind turbines to military guidance systems. Exactly. elements that the United States currently imports almost entirely from China. Garrison's voice took on an edge of urgency. If my grandfather's claim contains what we think it does, it could be strategically significant on a national level. Would you risk everything for a discovery that could change history? The revelation cast their expedition in an entirely new light. This wasn't just about family legacy or even commercial mining rights. It was about resources that governments considered crucial to national security. No wonder Garrison had been so careful. No wonder Alexander Burke was suddenly so interested. As the others continued discussing the implications, Eleanor slipped away from the fire to check the perimeter of their camp. The wind had strengthened, carrying not just the promise of distant rain, but something else, the faint but unmistakable scent of cigarette smoke. Someone was nearby, watching. She moved silently along the edge of the firelight, her eyes adjusting to the darkness beyond. There, a brief flare of orange as someone took a drag, quickly extinguished, but not before she marked the location. Approximately 200 yards west, positioned on a rise that would give clear sightlines to their camp. Eleanor returned to the fire, catching Garrison's eye and gesturing subtly for him to join her away from the others. "We're being watched," she informed him quietly. "Single observer, West Ridge, possibly a scout." Garrison's hand moved instinctively to the sidearm he carried concealed beneath his jacket. "Burke, most likely. The question is whether they're just tracking us or planning something more direct." She glanced up at the darkening sky. "The storm system moving in might work to our advantage. Water will obscure tracks, and the canyon acoustics during rainfall make it nearly impossible to track by sound." "Can you lose them?" Garrison asked, his voice tight with controlled tension. Eleanor nodded, already formulating route adjustments in her mind. "But it means taking paths no one else would attempt. Risky passages that won't appear on any map Burke might have. Do it. Whatever it takes." Saga. Garrison's expression hardened with resolve. "Because if Alexander Burke is willing to sabotage your equipment just to pressure you into selling your business, I don't want to find out what he'd do to claim a discovery worth millions." "Billions," Eleanor corrected softly. "If the deposit is as significant as you believe." "When the stakes reach billions, how far will your enemies go to stop you?" In the flickering light of the campfire, shadows played across Garrison's face, deepening the lines of determination, or obsession, that had driven him to search for his grandfather's legacy. "Then we need to reach it first, Mrs. Westbrook. Before Burke, before the storm, before whatever else this canyon decides to throw at us, or turn them." What neither of them realized as they rejoined the group was that the observer on the ridge wasn't working for Alexander Burke at all, but for someone with far more dangerous intentions for what lay hidden beneath Whispering Rock. Could Eleanor's perfect memory be the only weapon capable of defeating an enemy they didn't even know existed? Deep narrator voice. 3 weeks later, as a Marine Corps helicopter thundered over Eagle Canyon, General James Harrington of the Pentagon's Strategic Resources Division stared down at the bodies of 17 Black Ops mercenaries scattered across the blood-stained canyon floor. "My God," he whispered to his aide, "she did this with just a compass and her memory." Standing atop Sentinel Rock with Old Glory snapping in the desert wind behind her, Eleanor Westbrook watched the approaching chopper with the steely determination that had made America great. The rare earth deposit, now secured for the United States instead of foreign interests, would ensure American manufacturing dominance for generations. The president himself had called that morning, offering her the Congressional Medal of Honor for stopping the Chinese-backed operation. But Eleanor didn't need Washington's approval. She had preserved her husband's legacy and proven what the greatest generation always knew. American grit, Second Amendment rights, and good old-fashioned know-how would always triumph over technology and corruption. As the helicopter landed and Eleanor tucked Robert's compass back into her shirt pocket, right next to her heart, she allowed herself the first genuine smile in 3 years. "Welcome to my canyon, boys," she said to the approaching officials. "Bet you wish you had a guide who knows the terrain. Subscribe now for more true American heroes." Tomorrow, ex-Marine Grandpa takes down home invaders with skills from Vietnam.